It's 2025, a new year and the best time to turn your great idea into a business. Shopify is how you're going to make it happen. Let me tell you how. Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sale. Get your store up and running easily with thousands of customizable templates. All you need to do is drag and drop. Their powerful social media tools let you connect all your channels and create shoppable posts. Established in 2025. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo. All lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/promo.
Well, fascinating. There you have YMCA.
Welcome to Quiet Riot, the politics podcast that knows how to send out its heart without doing a fascist salute. I'm Naomi Smith.
And I'm Andreou. We know that for many of you, the world feels overwhelming this week, which is why we will sift through the news and bring you that noteworthy instead of the click-worthy, a sort of inauguration filtration station.
And we will always give you something you can do. Little is more disabling than impotent fury. So each week we will give you a call to action, because politics can be something you do, not something simply done to you.
So take a breath, get comfy, turn up the volume, and let's begin another Quiet Riot. Hello, and welcome to Quiet Riot. I'm Alex.
And I'm Naomi.
And I'm your Scottish producer, Kenny, fresh back from Trump International Golf Links in Aberdeenshire, where I've been installing anti-arsehole mines.
This week, we're recording a day later than normal to give ourselves a bit of room to chew over the first few days of the worst reboot since The Mummy. We'll be sifting through everything from executive orders to the first signs of conscious uncoupling of trust, and how the UK government is and should be responding.
And because we are not sick of experts, indeed we relish them, we're delighted to have back with us today the UCL's Dr. Brian Klaas. Welcome back, Brian.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Brian, you went to your grandma's in December after Trump was elected. I'm sure that in your wider family group there must be the odd Trump sympathizer. How did that feel, having to share loving space?
Yeah, much of my extended family are Trump supporters. To be honest, the thing that's most bewildering when you come from an environment like the UK where you can be reasonably confident, especially in London, that most people around you do not like Donald Trump, to going to, say, landing in an airport in the United States, and you look around and you have this thought that half of these people think he's great, or they at least think he's worth electing. And it's a very jarring feeling. I felt that really strongly when I came back the first time after 2016 as well. And you just have to sort of grapple with that, where you see all this disqualifying behavior, the bigotry, the cruelty, the authoritarianism, and you look around and you're like, I don't know who, but odds are that 1 out of every 2 people I'm looking at are Trump people. It's a very unnerving thing, and it's one of the great puzzles, I think, of the 21st century, how that can be.
Quiet Riot.
If Trump proved anything with his avalanche of day 1 and 2 executive orders, it is precisely the importance of filtering. As the song goes, give 'em the old flim-flam flummox, full and fracture 'em, how can they hear the truth above the roar? What will be key in the next 4 years is to distinguish the brain farts, the things which are said once never to be repeated, the diversions, the things that are symbolically outrageous and designed to keep us busy, but have little practical applications, the things that are pure performance for his base, and then the things that are actually happening and matter a great deal. Is ordering a review of trade practices and agreements worth spending time on right now? Is revoking the security clearance of John Bolton? Is declaring that federal buildings should respect regional, traditional and classical architectural heritage? considering designating drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, ordering to safeguard the American people's freedom to choose from a variety of goods and appliances, including but not limited to light bulbs, dishwashers, washing machines, gas stoves, water heaters, toilets, and shower heads. Is renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America anything more than a culture war's artifact? Even suspending the TikTok ban for 75 days is not really in itself something that requires analysis, other than to say that the Fox News ticker tape calling it titcock for several hours before someone noticed has had me giggling for days. Even ordering all agencies to address the cost of living crisis, as grand as it sounds, is utterly meaningless. So, executive orders. Brian, which are the ones that matter?
Yeah, so if I had to pick the number one thing that happened this past week that's worth paying attention to, it's actually a pardon. It's the pardon of the January 6th Capitol rioters or the insurrectionists. And one of the ways that I describe this to people is I say, imagine that this didn't happen in the United States. Imagine, one of the things I did in my research is I went around to authoritarian regimes around the world and I'd study, Madagascar or Zambia. If this happened in Madagascar, we would not mince our words. We would say the authoritarian ruler inspired a violent militia to try to seize power in a coup. They failed to do that. They returned to power, and then they gave them permission to do it again because they wielded their authority in order to say, if you attack my enemies, I will get you out of jail. Mm. I mean, that is a very dark thing to happen. And it's because it's in the United States that, what really worries me is not just what Trump did, but the muted reaction to it. And I saw this on the BBC. I saw this on the New York Times. The headlines were, Trump asserts muscular authority, or in flurry of activity, Trump has busy first day in office. Mm. And I think that's the stuff where you're just the patterns of media response to something that is fundamentally saying, if you attack my opponents, I will get you out of jail. For people who tried to murder police officers and potentially murder members of Congress. Some of the people who were pardoned had zip ties to take members of Congress hostage. Their plan was clearly to kill people. And these people have now been taken out of prison. How those people can claim to be pro-police, pro-law and order. And then the second one that's related is another pardon is the man who made the Silk Roads drug marketplace. And the height of hypocrisy on this, for people who are less familiar, he created the largest drug marketplace in human history, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars of cryptocurrency transactions for the worst drugs you can buy. Did all sorts of other awful stuff. And, in a multi-country investigation was found to have done this. And Donald Trump simultaneously says that we should execute drug dealers, and he pardoned the largest drug marketplace creator in human history. And so you're creating this tier of justice, which is a hallmark of authoritarian rule, which is that if you're my friend, if you're an ally of mine,
you can do whatever.
The laws don't apply, and if you don't, I will go after you with the full weight of the law. So that's a cop-out because it's not executive orders, but it's the most important executive action. The most important executive order, to my mind, is the attempt to end birthright citizenship, which is in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And this will fail, but the reason I picked it is because it's indicative of the mentality of what this administration is going to do. You have something that is black and white in the Constitution that says you cannot do this, and he will test the limit. And it will take time, and there will be states challenges and all these things. And it's an indication that this is going to be a lawless administration that will only get constrained when the judges that Donald Trump appointed constrain him. And that is scary. There's more consequential things that will actually turn into policy that will happen this week. But I think that sort of nexus of the pardons and then also the executive order that's just so blatantly illegal. And the muted response to it, where the coverage again was Trump declares birthright citizenship no longer a thing. I mean, he can't. It's illegal, right? It's unconstitutional. But he got the headlines he wanted. So,
could any of these pardons in particular be a hostage to fortune for him?
My first reaction was 1,500 people, a lot of them quite violent thugs. When comes the moment where the first one beats their partner to death or blows something up or shoots someone? Isn't that just a massive hostage to fortune? Because that person would literally not be there but for that pardon, isn't there a huge political peril there? He didn't have to do it. He could have taken it case by case.
Yeah, so I'm less optimistic that he'll pay a price for it for two reasons. One is that it will simply get drowned out in everything else. And I think at some point, like, it's just not going to cut through. And I mean, if someone murders a member of Congress, maybe that level of violence and targeted political violence. So the first thing is there's the flurry of activity will bury some of the worst stuff. But the second reason is, which is I think the biggest point, and I'm working on a piece at the moment about this, is the information system in the US is just completely broken. And it's hard to fathom because the UK has its own problems, but they're not nearly as bad. I think there's like three very clear differences, which are huge problems that make Trump unaccountable. One is what I call the Fox News problem, which is if something like a January 6th pardon person commits a crime, CNN and MSNBC will cover it, and Fox News might mention it once, and that will be it. Right? So it won't have happened in the Fox News universe. That's the first problem. The second one is that they will then have the disinformation space on social media where people will say, this was an FBI agent that did this to make the MAGA people look bad. Right? So the disinformation on social media means it wasn't real. It's a fake story. And then the third one is the conspiracy theory problem, which happened around January 6th, where they say, yes, but this is part of a secret plot and you don't understand it's all part of the plan, which is the QAnon problem. So imagine you have a January 6th person gets pardoned, commits a crime. If you watch Fox News, you might not know about it. If you look online, they'll say it was somebody else in a MAGA shirt to make them look bad.
Or that it was a deep plant.
Exactly. And it was all part of Trump's plan all along.
Yeah.
And so, to my mind, someone who studies democracy, this is the problem of the 21st century, is if you disconnect information from accountability, you're screwed. Because you just can't have political consequences when bad things happen. And that's the world Trump has inhabited for the last few years.
And now we have no fact checkers on Meta platforms in the US.
But equally, you tie all that into the fact that if there's something that Trump has probably learned from his first period in power is that he's effectively above the law anyway. Yep. And he's pretty much unimpeachable too. There are zero consequences, whatever he does.
And I mean, the one thing that it could help with is the midterms. In 2 years, there's another chance to go to the polls and constrain Trump through Congress. And that's it. I mean, the other institutions are going to be very pliant. There will be problems with him passing some legislation from the right. He'll have more of a problem from the far right of his party saying they didn't go far enough. That's more of an issue for him than because they don't need the Democrats' votes for anything. That's the main thing. And the laws of politics, the traditional laws of politics, for whatever reason, do seem to apply to the Republican Party other than Trump.
And I'm fascinated by that. Obviously, here in the UK, we look at net approval ratings of leaders versus their parties. It does feel to me that there couldn't be a bigger gulf between Trump the man and then the GOP. Where is the popularity of the wider party at the moment? Or is it now just totally Trump's
It's funny, you almost have the opposite in the UK in a way, because you had like Truss at 9% and like people sort of were okay with the Tories still. I mean, like exactly. It's like 30% were still, So it's sort of the opposite there. I think there's this odd dynamic with Trump where I think Berlusconi sort of had a similar thing where like he was just such a larger than life figure that the rules, it's just, oh, that's him being him, The Republican Party, when it goes on legislation, it's in trouble. I mean, the stuff that they're proposing, with the exception of immigration, which is broadly, like, Americans broadly want the border to be closed. I mean, it's just, whether or not you agree with the policy, it's something that has been a major political liability for the Democrats, as have some of the culture wars issues. I think a lot of the actual domestic policy legislation the Republicans have is toxic. And the foreign policy legislation, interestingly, is popular, but the fallout from it is going to be disastrous.
We talked about this very briefly after the inauguration on Monday night, and Alex and Matthew McGregor and I recorded a quick react. And for me, the Emancipation Hall speech that he made to his adoring fans was very telling, because he more or less said, they all told me that, a lot of the reason why people back me this time is overinflation, cost of living, and that's what they're most worried about. That isn't what they should be most worried about. They should be most worried about illegal aliens. Mm-hmm. And that is a very inflationary policy move. Right. We know that will have a huge inflationary pressure on the US. So is there any hope that he could quite quickly run up against a loss of support for not delivering on easing cost of living pressure if he does indeed pursue some of the foreign policy stuff he's talking about, whether that's tariffs or sending back
Sean
migrants?
Hannity was trying to get him onto The Economy, interviewing him yesterday, and Trump actually said, I don't care about the economy. I want to talk about January 6th.
This is the one area where the laws of political gravity could apply, is that you cannot tell people that their grocery bill has gone down if it hasn't. At some point, you are going to have people say, that's not true for me. On the other hand, for a very long time, when inflation did start to decline under Biden, and when the economy was outpacing inflation, the overwhelming majority of Americans didn't believe that. So,
but is that because of inequality and wage?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, there's loads of reasons. Yeah, sure. I take your point, but I mean, I think there are issues where the motivated reasoning of saying now, Trump's back, everything is good, that will get him through for quite a while. And he'll have a honeymoon for quite a while as well. He'll say, look, it's going to take some time, all this type of stuff. And this is one of the other things that has a parallel with Brexit, is that when economic costs happen, are you able to ascribe them to Brexit?
Eventually.
Or, but exactly. But it took a very long time. And the pandemic was a confounding factor because you had the pandemic.
Ukraine.
Exactly. And so what Trump, as a masterful communicator with his base, will do is, if there are problems, he will have other things that he blames them on. And this is where there's a really strong debate that's happening, I think, in the Democratic Party right now, of should we just let him do stuff? Right. And this is a very thorny, moral landmines everywhere.
Like, don't interrupt your enemy if he's making a mistake.
Yes. And they'll inflict a lot of harm on the country. But the one thing that Democrats have done in the past is they've blocked some of the things that Trump wants to do. And then he blames them for everything. And so at some point you say, knock yourself out. I'm not advocating for this, but this is an argument that says, knock yourself out, govern the country how you want, see how it goes. Right. Because what you're trying to do is really unpopular. And when you do the tariffs, when you do the abortion policy, all this stuff, people don't want it. And they don't want the fallout from it. But if the Democrats block it instantly, who's to blame? It's the Democrats. They're the obstructionists. Weirdly, the Republicans did this to Obama and Biden, and they didn't complain, right? So there's an asymmetry in politics in the U.S. that way.
And a lot of stuff, I think, also will take quite a lot to operationalize. Like, there's an executive order about terminating all diversity, equality, inclusion policies at the federal level. That actually requires every person doing the hiring in every state, however progressive,
to completely change the process.
To completely change the process under which they hire, which can only happen either if you replace everyone working for the state or over a very, very long period of time.
Brian, did you know that you are now a trans woman? Because in one of the executive orders, Trump has basically accidentally, I assume, told all men that they are now trans. Titled Defending Women from Gender Ideology, Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government.
Well, that's quite a title, isn't it?
This new sweeping order that he signed literally a couple of hours after he got into the Oval Office again is seeking to establish a new legal definition of sex as part of the rollback of trans rights. And it says that the US only recognises two sexes, male and female, defined respectively as person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the small reproductive cell. Conception results in a single cell that has neither gonads nor makes gametes. And then in the weeks following conception, all fetal genitalia is female until then it kicks into being male. So we all started out as women anyway.
So at that point of the definition.
So at conception, you're nothing. You are definitely neither male nor female. And then for a while, you are definitely female. And then the cell decides whether or not it's going to...
J.K. Rowling ain't going to like that, is she?
No. So there you go. He has basically, according to the definition, decided that half of US citizens are definitely trans women.
Quiet riot. Winter, a time filled with outdoor fun and games. Until a pipe freezes and bursts. Don't let winter weather burst your pipes. Mow & Flow monitors your home's water and shuts it off automatically.
Quiet riot. Now, in with the series, there was also the heartbreakingly ridiculous, the achingly, breakingly, heart-achingly ridiculous. This is what happened when Billy Ray Cyrus tried to entertain the crowds at Trump's Liberty Ball.
They told me to kill as much time as possible, so... Does anybody know the words to Achy Breaky Heart while I'm here? I'll try a little bit. Let's see what happens. Check. Hey, is my guitar still on? I think they cut me off. Is my guitar on, guys? I don't hear my guitar anymore. Check. Is anybody awake? I don't hear it. Do y'all hear this? Where's everybody at? Check. Is anyone back there? Can somebody turn my guitar back on? We're going to sing a little bit more. Y'all want to sing more, or you want me to just get the hell off the stage? I don't give a damn. Y'all probably tired of listening to the music over and over. And I says,
This went on for a full 10 minutes.
Bloody hell. And you could say that wasn't even the biggest tech difficulty that Trump faced in the first few days. Musk has derided 47's AI plan and clashed publicly with OpenAI boss Sam Altman. Trouble in paradise? I mean, that really hasn't taken very long for that romance to come unstuck.
What do you make of that? It's really quite a public fallout now.
I think it will be much worse. I mean, these are two ego cases, both narcissistic megalomaniacs, and they do not tolerate dissent. So there will be a falling out. I mean, it's a matter of time. But the problem is, Elon Musk has painted himself into a corner because I think what he hasn't clocked is that the rest of the world is not the U.S. And the things like his Nazi salute, that might play okay among his right-wing base in the U.S., but like you see newspaper headlines in Germany where they didn't even show the arm. They had to block out the arm because it's so, egregiously terrible.
And he's got involved in German politics, supported the AfD. What will that do?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, somebody said that there's some line on social media where someone said if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck but steps like a goose, you know what you're dealing with. And I don't know how it will play out, but it's a very dark thing. Watching Elon Musk on Twitter X for the last 2 years, I mean, you're watching radicalization of the richest man in human history, potentially. I mean, I don't know in terms of real terms whether he's the richest man in human history, but I always say to people, it's like, $400 billion of net worth. I work in Madagascar sometimes. There's 30 million people there. They have an economic output of $30 billion a year. It's just so he's very powerful. He's very influential.
Can he not just buy Madagascar?
I would not wish that on Madagascar. Tough call.
I know.
Send him to Mars.
Utilitarianism, least amount of harm to biggest number of people. Maybe Madagascar should take one for the team.
He's such an idiot too. I mean, he could have the world's best information service at his fingertips. And information, it's the crucial part of good decision making in life, right? And he could have the single best private intelligence agency in the world. And instead, he is getting his news from absolute idiot zealots on X. And you can watch how much time he's spending on there. I don't know.
And he's trolling. He's just leaning into it now. His latest tweets over the last 24 hours have all been leaning into the Nazi theme. And he's just trolling us for attention.
Jimmy Kimmel said that basically Trump now has already for sure come to loathe him, but needs his money, which interestingly is the Melania dilemma.
Well, he might not need his money as much now. He's got this meme coin.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Melania's
the
didn't sell very well.
No,
Her NFT did not.
I saw that, but that is another storyline actually that's super important for this presidency is the blatant corruption. It's gonna be so corrupt.
The positives. Ukraine, his approach to that. It isn't what many feared. He's actually being quite hostile to Putin.
Well, I would say it's very early days. My suspicion on this, and this is sort of, it's a guess, but there were reports that with the stuff going on in Gaza and Israel as well, Trump said to Netanyahu, you need to solve this before I become president because I don't want to deal with this. And so my assumption, my read of this at the moment is that he wants the focus of the news to be purely on him performatively showing he's serious about immigration. I suspect there'll be some very publicly telegraphed raids. I suspect there'll be a big show of force on the border. And part of the reason why I'm less optimistic that the Ukraine stuff is actually going to turn out differently from how we feared is simply because he doesn't want foreign policy around an issue that's got no real upside for him because it could fall apart very badly to be the central pillar of, the first 100 days in office. So I don't know. I mean, he did criticize Putin for the first time that I'm aware of, where he actually said something bad about Vladimir Putin. But there's so many data points on the other side of that I wouldn't be holding my breath for him to be the friend of Ukraine that they've been waiting for.
Yeah, one swallow does not a spring make.
Yeah.
And what about Gaza? What about the Middle East? I mean, it seems to me churlish not to acknowledge that the situation was stuck before, and his upcoming inauguration and vague threats did work to unstick it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would give credit to both. The groundwork for this deal was laid by the Biden administration. Trump probably pushed it over the line, and the shifting dynamics probably did help politically and so on. There's going to be things that the Trump administration is able to do internationally, and part of the reason they're going to be able to do them is because he is going to throw around American power, which is very formidable.
Yep.
The question is whether it's a good strategy over the long run. I mean, you can get people to do things because they're afraid of you, and the long-standing view of the political left in the United States is that actually, over the long term, erodes American power, because you can't call on people to do favors for you simply out of the goodness of their heart or because they're an ally. And so this is one of the big divides, right? And there's scholars of international relations theory they'll take Trump's side. They'll say, yeah, sorry, but the allies-based approach, at the end of the day, it's all power. That's what Trump is the test case for. He's going to be, do you reshape the world in America's interest by simply being a bully? In some places, that's going to work. It's going to trash America's reputation, but it might actually get the policy over the line. So this may be one of those instances where power spoke, and Trump calling Netanyahu or whatever it was, his envoy, was the sort of extra push to get the ceasefire done. I don't know.
It seems to me the Bishop, Marianne Budd, who called him out to his face, seemed quite impactful to me. And it also made me realize how absent Democrats have been in doing the same. Let's listen to a little bit of what she said.
Let me make one final plea, Mr. President. Millions have put their trust in you. And as you told the nation yesterday, you have felt the providential hand of a loving God. In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now.
Now, Trump is still minus negative favorability-wise. And that, I think, is important to emphasize, because I sense a kind of a deflation of progressives the world over. Like, this is it, we've lost. Might as well just find a cave. He's just negative now, like 1.6 points. So his rating has improved massively. But he was minus 18 points when he left office in January 2021. And it seems to me that the reality of Trump is much less popular than the idea of Trump. Yeah. So is this what needs to be done, like relentlessly for the next 2 years to the midterms and the 2 years after that, just to highlight the reality of what life is like under Trump?
I think you're very astute to point to this in terms of the favorability, but it's also the election itself. I mean, the number of people who describe this as a landslide to me. I mean, he won by 1.5%, right? I mean, half the country voted for the other person, basically. Yeah. The lesson from that is not that this is, nobody is opposed to Trump. A lot of people are opposed to Trump. And part of the reason why he won was because the Biden turnout collapsed a bit, right? It wasn't that he won over a huge number more people. I will say that in terms of the messaging, Democrats need to be much better at message discipline. They need to have better communicators that are younger. People are very divided on AOC, for example, but she's a very good communicator. And you need to pick a few of these people. I'm not saying it has to be AOC, but someone who's just good messenger for the party, because there's not a de facto person to be that right now. I mean, you don't have, Kamala Harris isn't actually in elected office now. Yeah. Biden is too old. Obama's not going to be the messenger. So who is it, right? And you have to pick someone that sort of becomes the face of the Democratic Party in the meantime. But on the point that you're making around, the sort of unpopular stuff, in addition to the cost of living, the economy, all these sorts of things, I would go anti-corruption as a Democratic argument, especially with the insider elite angle. His chief of staff is a lobbyist. Already they're changing rules that are exactly what the companies that she represented wanted. So this stuff is universally unpopular. In Britain, I've realized in 13 years of living here, there's a very strong cultural norm towards fair play. People want, the idea that like you just follow the rules. You
Standards, regulations.
Yeah. And that exists to a lesser extent in the US. There's a lot more individualism, do what you can get away with and so on. But people really don't like corruption, especially among rich people who are following one set of rules and everyone else is supposed to follow a different set. And this whole idea of the government being hopelessly corrupt is something that Trump has actually pushed for a long time too. So going on that, self-enrichment, the self-dealing.
You've got to be careful going on that though, because you then have to be whiter than white.
Yeah, well, that's
on
true.
The issue. And when we think about the immense sleaze and corruption and the crony contracts over COVID that were overseen by Johnson and Sunak, and prior to that with other cozy deals with their mates, the ultimate result for that in the UK was more or less total distrust in the political class as a whole.
For sure.
And a plague on all your houses, and you're all on the make, and you're all out for your own pocket lining, not
so
for the little
person.
So I don't disagree with you, and it is going to be their weak point, and there is a way to do it, but you can't be pious in doing it. Because there will be a corrupt.
But that ship sailed in the U.S. Everyone thinks the government's corrupt in the U.S. I think we're already there.
No matter which shade.
Yeah, I think we're already there.
There is an interesting kind of opportunity to be exploited here. In America, rich people are actually very popular. Like if you look at opinion polling, they love billionaires.
We like the underdog, and then once they make it, we like to cut them down again.
And the only exception is tech billionaires. They are despised. The polling on like Musk, Bezos, Zuckerberg, their personal popularity is down the drain.
Yeah.
Despite them having the power of like a massive media empire, basically, that can boost their popularity, people still hate them. And that's in a country that actually likes rich entrepreneurs, generally speaking, much more than anywhere else in the world, right? And that, to me, creates a kind of opportunity to just keep pointing to these people and say, those are his mates. Are your interests in his heart,
company he keeps,
or are their interests? Because they are universally loathed.
Yeah, and I think that's where, one of the things that did cut through to a certain extent was the aspects around the inauguration being brought indoors and basically only the rich elites being able to attend for all these MAGA people who came to DC. I think I'm not saying it turned...
Their tickets are commemorative, Brian.
What'd you say?
Their tickets are now commemorative.
There you go, yeah. But it is. This is the kind of thing where I saw some posts from people who are pro-Trump saying things like, wait a minute, I thought he was for us. And this is the first indication. So it's like, that's the kind of stuff where Democrats need to really hammer that wedge and exploit it.
Yeah.
But it's going to take a while to cut through and actually change opinions.
Yeah.
Brian, our listeners like to get involved. They like to do things. We're seeing an increasing number of people writing into us saying, what can I do from abroad? How can I do anything to stop the awful onslaught of populism and far right-wingery that is corrupting our democracies around the world? What advice do you have for people listening? What can they do?
Well, I think, you can't solve America's problems from Britain. That's the first thing to say. But I do think that my general advice is I think there's been this mistake in thinking that democracy and protecting all these sort of institutions we care about is purely a thing that happens at national elections and then we're done. For most people, politics is actually about solving problems in their local community. And so to me, what I've been saying to Americans is the best response to Trumpism is not to go online and social media outrage. It's to get involved in a community organization and volunteer. There is so much research about the sort of ripple effects of volunteering, not just for the social benefit it produces in the community, but also for longevity for the volunteers themselves. It's like the one thing that is guaranteed to improve your lifespan and your quality of life and also help your community. There's a huge amount of research on this. So if you don't volunteer, my main recommendation is to do that a couple hours a week for something that you care about. And in Britain, you can do that with an organization that has links to the United States. And that can then be part of a sort of transnational movement that does this stuff. I wrote about this previously in a piece on what I call super citizens, about something I do every Saturday morning, which is park run. And it's the classic example of this where, it's not the same for politics, but the principle is really, really astute, I think, which is that one guy founded Parkrun, 20 odd years ago. And there were 9 runners in Bushy Park in London. Now 9 million people have done it. And it's massively improved the NHS because you got all these people running that didn't used to do exercise and so on. And it's a parable for the guy just decided to do something, right? He could have just posted on social media, oh, I wish there was a run. But he just founded one, and then it replicated and it spread. And I think that the best antidote to a feeling of bleak despair in the modern period is just go out and do something that produces a ripple effect and hope for the best.
Quiet riot. And now, I almost put my head in my hands as we approach our regular feature section, because with Trump back in the Oval Office and Fox News on steroids, dare I ask you,
loving
Alex?
titcock. I mean, it needs to be called titcock from now on, as far as I'm concerned.
Dare I ask, what do you have in store for this week's Wokey Dokey?
Wokey Dokey.
I thought I'd take Brian's advice and bring it to the local level.
Okay. How
Just
local?
to show that, nowhere is immune from wokery. So Bristol City Council...
They are quite woke.
They are quite woke. They called for people to stop burning wood at home because they've had a really big problem with particulates. And it's a problem that, because I spent a lot of my winters in Athens, I can tell you, is not some airy-fairy thing. Burning wood produces larger particulates. It's a really specific thing. So your lungs don't filter them. This black soot just sits there, and it is hugely, hugely harmful. So they put out a thing saying it's important to understand the impact this has on people's health and the environment. And the responses they got were really quite something. I mean, I'm glad I don't live in Bristol. What they really mean is follow our wokery, and you fit in just nicely. And that's probably one of the more polite responses. Like, the main ones went along the lines of, suck dicks. So what happens when we're reliant on clean energy? We have an outage and there's a cold snap. I mean, someone posted a photo of a wood-burning stove with cry. Since we first became human, wrote another one, we've gathered around the campfire, but it's only a problem now.
What, now that we don't die at 27 from other things?
I mean, the responses to this are get fucked. Stop trying to control people's lives.
That's the Bristol I know.
Someone else, freeze to death instead, net zero crap. The whole thing is just insane. So clean air is now woke.
Well, thank you, Alex. And listeners, remember...
I don't know that you should be thanking me. I mean, what is going on? Seriously.
Listeners, we love hearing about any instances you come across in your travels on the internet of wokey dokiness. Do keep them coming in to quietriotpod@gmail.com. Quiet riot. Quiet riot. Now, in this brave new world of transatlantic politics, of course, it's not just the unhinged presence of Trump we have to navigate. Swinging wildly off his own gilded hinges is, of course, Elon Musk. And as we've already heard in part one of the show, he's picking fights with gay abandon. One of the biggest of those fights appears to be with Europe, and it's becoming a particularly gnarly problem for Prime Minister Starmer. And this isn't just about name-calling. This week's big story in the UK has, of course, been the Southport murders and Musk's social media cesspit X being heavily implicated in the riots that followed the murder of those poor children. Musk himself has been asked to testify in Parliament to the Science, Innovation and Technology Select Committee about his company's algorithm, which was accused of promoting misinformation that inflamed disorder in the wake of the murders. But how can Starmer deal with Musk? Indeed, how can Europe deal with the threat from a man who appears to have enough money, influence and ego to play by whatever rules he chooses? All this comes, of course, against a backdrop of looming international chaos, thanks to Trump's bullshitter in a China shop approach to international relations. Brian, you study democracies all over the world. Is there any pattern to what's happening on the international stage between America and its erstwhile allies?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is basically, Britain is actually a very good test case for this, where you have countries that have been structurally and sort of by historical reasons allied with the United States for a very long time. And yet you have electorates that they hate Donald Trump, basically. And especially if you're a left-wing government, if you're left of center, it's particularly challenging because you are simultaneously elected by people who really hate Donald Trump, and you're supposed to carry the mantle of hard-nosed strategic self-interest. I was asked at a sort of, government briefing at one point around the election what to do. And my advice was, if you just pull punches all the time, you're just going to end up with the worst of every world.
Yep.
You're going to end up undercutting your own dignity and power on the international stage, and you're not going to get Trump to change. So, I think you pick your battles wisely. You don't needlessly
roll around in the mud.
Yeah, there's no reason to provoke Donald Trump for no gain. So if there's a small issue that you can flatter him on, fine, whatever, right? But on the stuff you care about, you gotta dig in. And I'd say the same about regulation with social media. And the EU is I think gearing up for this fight. Musk can have a lot of money. He can't stop Europe from regulating him. And so he might still be okay. He might still have his megaphone of X, but these are the moments that you're challenged on what you actually care about. And I hope the governments of the EU and the UK pass that test.
He folded quickly enough in Brazil when they decided to say, no, if
Yeah,
you want to
and
be in this country, you have to abide by our rules.
These are people their worldview is completely filtered through power. So, if you want to get somebody to respect you, you punch back. And at some point, you have to pick which one you're going to throw, which punch you're going to throw, but you do need to punch back sometimes. Trump does respect that. I think that he might try to punish the UK if they push back too hard, but that's probably inevitable. At some point, whenever you're trying to come up with a strategy, think about the counterfactual. What would happen if we did the other strategy, right? And I don't see any world where Keir Starmer just all of a sudden becomes like a MAGA acolyte, and also Britain becomes better in foreign policy. It's not going to happen, right? So,
as we went to record today, the news was running with the story that Peter Mandelson has been rejected by Washington as the UK pick for AMBO to the US. And that's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah.
Diplomatically, that is pretty extraordinary. So when you talk about fighting back, is that something that the UK should retaliate with and say, well, we're not having your ambassador, or is that going to just spiral then into a really terrible decline in relations between the two countries?
It's a tough question. That one's a particularly tough question because diplomatic protocols are so long-standing, and you don't want to allow something that sets a precedent in diplomacy. But you also have to pick your battles really wisely. There is going to be a battle. There's going to be something that there's going to be a big fight on. And I would say to Keir Starmer, if he was listening to Quiet Riot, make a list of tiers of things that you have in terms of international priorities, and do not fold on the top tier. The other stuff you can sort of work with Europe and sort of, okay, the US is being bad on this or whatever, but we'll still be able to solve some problems.
I agree with Brian about the tiers of priorities. And yes, I think Britain and Europe more generally should have red lines that it sticks to. But that doesn't mean that we have to emulate their mode of doing politics. I think there is value to sticking to our mode of doing politics,
For sure.
our mode of doing diplomacy. Because what I see from a lot of online people feeding into their general dislike of Starmer, especially from the left, is that they seem to want Starmer to go on Twitter and tell Trump to go fuck himself.
Yeah, when he goes low, we go lower. Yeah.
That is what they seem to consider a strong response on a European level.
No.
And that is just nonsense. It's nonsense. to demand that. But I think a lot of people are genuinely in that headspace.
I'm getting quite a lot of that on
Yeah.
social media.
One thing I'm more optimistic about in the US than many people are, I know you like to highlight some optimism, is climate policy. And it's not because Trump won't be terrible for it, he will. It's because the states will set a lot of their own climate policies.
Yeah.
And if you sell a car in California, you're not going to have a California model of emissions and an Alabama model. You're just going to make one car for the US. So even if Trump rolls back some of this stuff, democratically controlled state governments can set higher environmental standards that can de facto act as national environmental standards simply because California is so big. So it won't solve everything, but that's the kind of stuff where if I was Keir Starmer, I would work with California.
Yeah, and I think this is where it helps actually to have a sense of perspective. It takes a year to withdraw formally from the Paris Accords, and a lot of people don't seem to remember that he did that before. So this is the second time he's withdrawn from the Paris Accords.
Yep.
And the second time he's withdrawn from the World Health Organization, for that matter. The last time was during a pandemic, and it barely registered as a blip during that very important period. So in the long arc of looking after the environment, half the country changing its policies for possibly 2 years because we don't know what will happen in the midterms is a blip.
It's also on the private side of things, right? Companies want predictability, and it takes a really long time to change a strategy
And
as
a
an energy
production line.
company.
Yeah.
And so, if you think your regulatory environment is going to be very different in 2026 or 2028, it's hugely costly to just all of a sudden switch.
Change
now,
everything.
yeah.
So, there are some things that are happening with climate policy that were started by the Inflation Reduction Act, which basically was a giant climate change bill. Trump will try to undo some of the incentives, but a lot of the companies have changed their strategy already. So my point is not that this will not be bad. It's going to be very bad. Like the foreign policy of Trump is going to be disastrous. It's just that there are pressure points that other governments can use to mitigate the damage in ways that make them more temporary or less damaging.
I'm really pleased to hear you offer some green shoots when it comes to climate, but let's talk NATO as the other big international organization, which he has threatened many times over the last couple of years. What do we anticipate is going to happen to NATO? What might that mean for member states that will potentially have to increase their defence spending quite a bit? We are in an incredibly volatile time. While a change to environmental regulation may take some time to actually filter through, defence spending can have an impact on the ground in somewhere like Gaza very, very quickly.
This is the big question that no one knows the answer to, and it's very important, but it's very, very unknown. And that's because Trump has signaled that he might try to withdraw from NATO. This is one area where I could actually see Republican pushback. I mean, the people who are in the Republican Party, a lot of them are hawks. They believe in NATO and so on. Many of them have built careers on it. So it would be an unpopular thing among some of the elected elites in his party. But all bets are off if that happens. I mean, it's the linchpin of global security since 1949. So it's been many, many decades of this was how global security was sort of structured. And no one knows what would happen if the U.S. pulls out. But it's possible. It might happen. What really scares me, and I know this sounds silly, but it's the Greenland and Panama Canal stuff, not because I think it's actually, who knows what's going to happen. What was terrifying to me about that whole discourse was that it took about a week for the Republican Party to openly say, we can just seize territory. There's all these clips, I'm not sure how many of you have seen them on Fox News, where congressmen from, real diehard pro-Trump congressmen, one of them literally said, we are the apex predator, so if we want to take this, we can. That was not something of the first Trump administration. International law wasn't something that Trump thought a lot about, but they just didn't, the U.S. didn't try to just seize parts of territory because we wanted to. And there has now become an orthodoxy in the Republican Party that, yes, we should just take back the Panama Canal and Greenland. It's not about those specific points. It's about, is there a return of something that has basically been the best positive legacy of World War II, which was that there became an international norm that you can't just snatch land through war. And now the Republican Party doesn't necessarily agree with that. That is very scary.
Although I would point to the fact that Greenland has completely disappeared from the discourse of the last
and they told him to fuck
days.
off. Did you see the Danish thing?
But I thought that was interesting that Panama is still part of the conversation, but Greenland isn't. And I think there is something to that. It feels instinctively like part of the Trump strategy internationally is to divide, to fracture, to create internal arguments between, for instance, since we're talking about NATO, the people who do pay above that target, like Greece and Finland, and the people who don't. They can create internal arguments between countries that are actually allies. But something like aggression about Greenland, the effect of that would be to just bring everyone else together and say, wind your fucking neck in. And I don't think they want that. Because when I say everyone, I mean including China. I think if you're in that kind of existential scenario, because a lot of people are now saying, oh, we don't deal with authoritarians, and always are pointing to Hitler in the Second World War. But in the Second World War, actually, we made common cause with Stalin and Mao. So we get in bed with some authoritarians when necessary. And Trump, I think, will have to be careful not to push it so far that basically he squishes Europe and China together because they see him as the biggest geopolitical existential risk.
Yeah.
And China, of course, has got big strategic interest in Panama, and as I understand it, it's been trying to pour billions into the creation of another route through there. So, yeah, all eyes on that.
As a longtime Trump watcher, you have to differentiate sometimes what the strategic reason of why Trump is being told that he might want to do something and why Trump is actually doing something. So there's a very interesting report in the New York Times that somebody had mentioned to Trump, Greenland is like the premier real estate because look how big it is, right? And this resonated with him. But Greenland, I mean, if you look up the sort of strategic assets of it, there's a lot of rare minerals in Greenland. There's reasons why the U.S. might want this from a rational point of view, right? And also the Arctic will become a major part of national security, international security, especially as it opens up more from melting, unfortunately. It's so fascinating to watch Trump talk about stuff because he believes that asylum is related to mental institutions. He says this in every speech. They're sending they're emptying the mental institutions. And you finally have this moment where you're like, oh my God, he thinks that when we say asylum and immigration, we're talking about mental asylums.
Oh my God.
And so when you're parsing out his behavior, you have to sort of figure out what is the reason why somebody like Stephen Miller or Steve Bannon is telling him to do this? And what is the reason in his worldview, what is this about?
One last thing before we close this section. I'm really interested in the legitimization of crypto going more or less unnoticed. We did mention the pardoning of Ross Ulbricht earlier on. The crossover between the crypto bro, the tech bro, the strongman theory of history, it's so intertwined. And the legitimization of that as a currency, whatever it is we want to call it, is huge, no?
What's really fascinating, so Trump launched this meme coin, and for those who are not familiar with meme coin, it has no real world value whatsoever. It's literally a situation where people put their money into it, and if you get in early and then you sell... It's a pyramid scheme. Yeah, it's basically a pyramid scheme. And Trump made allegedly billions of dollars on this. Currently, it's his main source of net worth. But the problem is that there's sort of two things going on. One is that the actual cryptocurrency community is sort of annoyed about this, bizarrely, because they think that they're cheapening the Bitcoin. They've made this argument that Bitcoin is a real thing. And that, if you just launch these stupid meme coins, then it's like the caricature come to life. Yeah. So a lot of the cryptocurrency people are really upset about this. And then the second thing is that this is basically legalized a way to bribe the president of the United States. You can fund his meme coin and transfer money to him effectively, right, by buying it. So one of the things that I really lament is the shifts, and these are the canaries in the coal mine for when we talk about norm erosion and so on. There were all these questions around the first Trump term in January 2017. Are you going to divest from your properties, right? The buildings could be a conflict of interest because you have a Trump Tower in Turkey. What are you going to do if Turkey does, or the Philippines? And that was all these exposés and so on. It's not even talked about. No one thinks that Trump's going to get rid of any of his assets. And he's actively going to be pursuing international deals for the Trump Organization, and he has the meme coin. And so this will be...
he's making that point almost explicitly about Gaza.
Completely.
In the last few days. He's basically saying this could be worth a lot as beachfront property. The weather is nice there.
It is.
Yeah, so it's going to be, I think, open season for corruption, and Trump is really enriching himself through the presidency, and there is almost no transparency, and people, in the press have only enough. It's the flood the zone thing. You do an expose on Trump's conflicts of interest, and it seems quaint because, oh my gosh, we're going to care about the conflict of interest. I mean, the guy is openly saying they seize territory and, all this other stuff. So yeah, I'm worried about it. I think it's a way of legalizing corruption, and it's going to create foreign conflicts of interest that are so bad for U.S. national security and international security.
I think that the reason this stuff matters for us is because it degrades our politics. It seeps in. I was watching Claire Fox on Sky News the other day, and she was self-describing as on the left, which
she always does,
ludicrous. Yeah. Considering she was a Brexit Party MEP and has been put in the Lords by Boris Johnson. But she was asked about Trump's comment that there are only two genders. And she ended up defending it because she's from that part of the feminist movement that has an issue with biological sex not being recognized. Yet she ended up conflating the two. And then she was asked about Musk doing the Nazi salute, and she ended up defending that.
I think for many millions of people in America and actually elsewhere, hearing somebody assert actually the importance of women's rights, for example, the divisive nature of equity, diversity and inclusion policies, then they'll actually be quite relieved and think this is a very positive thing. Even people on the left, like me, and people who fought for women's rights and continue to fight for women's rights can actually see a glimmer of hope from across the sea. It's not because we're all fans of Trump or Musk, but because this feels like a new kind of politics, which I welcome.
Well, let's have a look at what he did.
And I just want to say thank you for making it happen. Thank you.
How are you interpreting that, Baroness Fox?
I'm interpreting it as any normal, sensible person was. This idea it's a Nazi salute is utterly bonkers. Of course it wasn't a Nazi salute, and those people who are obsessively going on about it, it wasn't a Nazi salute. For God's sake, the Nazis didn't hide the fact that they were saluted.
And so through this process of commenting, of punditry, the right wing in our party is being dragged into much darker stuff.
So I'll tell you the story of when I experienced this the first time firsthand. So in December of 2015, Trump announced a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. He said that was his plan as part of his platform, right? And then this became the Muslim ban when he took office in January of 2017. I was brought onto Sky News, and because of the nature of trying to find some sort of balance, they had a debate where I was put in the position of, no, Britain should not ban Muslims from entering the country. And they found someone to say, yes, they should. And I thought to myself, in what world would this have been editorially approved other than for Trump, right? So if you take the culture wars moments that Trump produces, he creates these things where it's not just that you get discuss them, but also that the media ends up producing the most fringe person. I mean, you create this bizarre false equivalence, and
it didn't start with Trump. It didn't, because we had this with Brexit as well. Sure. Climate change has had it for a long time, this sort of faux balance where leading climate scientist has to be put on with swivel-eyed loon, flat earther, in the interest of giving the other side.
Well, I was put on to Newsnight at one point in the Trump administration. They couldn't find anyone to debate me because he had done something so egregiously bad. I forget what it was. And they told me, this didn't end up panning out, but they told me, we have found a sorority girl on her year abroad in the Netherlands, and she'll be the Trump voice. And I'm like, I'm being introduced as like a professor of global politics, and we're talking about foreign policy.
University of London.
In what world? Like, I mean, I'm not trying to be mean, but like,
she's entitled to her opinion, Brian.
And that shows you, like, this idea of we have to have at whatever cost. I mean, it's just bizarre.
Okay, call to action. Alex, I think you've got one for our listeners.
I mean, we've said it before, we'll say it again. Don't be tempted back to X. While people like Musk may rail against censorship, X just works to actually silence the voices it doesn't like. It's censorship by the back door. You know this, and we know this, so keep encouraging others to reject Musk's propaganda channel. Feel free to join us on Blue Sky. There's a link to quietriotpod.bsky.social in the show notes, or find your own alternative. Just don't feed the troll, because that's what Musk is now.
Quiet Riot.
Now it's time for a little bit of good news, and boy, do we need it. It's time for Grin and Share It.
Good news is welcome to me. Bad news is hell come to me. Good news. Do-de-o-do-lo, 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 I want good news.
What have you got for us, Naomi?
Oh, it's a lovely one.
Go on.
Gay people getting married in Thailand.
Ah.
Thailand has legalized equal marriage. So hundreds of same-sex couples are now tying the knot all over Thailand because on Thursday this week, the country became the first in Southeast Asia to recognize marriage equality. So it's a really landmark bill, momentous win for the LGBT plus community that has fought for many, many years for the same marriage rights as heterosexual couples. And it was endorsed by the King last year, gone through Parliament, and now same-sex couples can register their marriage in full with legal, financial, medical rights, adoption rights, inheritance rights, all of the wonderful things that loving couples should be automatically entitled to. 200 couples signed up to get married at the Siam Paragon Shopping Centre, according to Bangkok Pride, which organised the event with the local authority. And a rainbow carpet was rolled out to the mall to welcome the newlyweds from all ages, all walks of life, including a police officer who turned up in uniform with his partner. A really lovely story and such a wonderful antidote.
In a region that's going the other way in many ways,
Indeed,
and a world that's going the other way.
Exactly.
And so it's important that it's not...
Yes, we need to take these wins, celebrate them, lift them up, and...
It'll be in Wokey Dokey this time next month.
My other half bounded up to me last Friday,
brilliant.
very
This is so
excitedly, saying, I've got a perfect Grin and Share It for you next week. And in either the greatest misunderstanding of the segment or the most profound understanding of the segment, he said to me, Isabel Oakeshott has moved to Dubai. As with all good things, we must now draw this week's episode of Quiet Riot to a close. Our enormous thanks to Brian for joining us once again. Thank you, Brian.
It's my pleasure. It's been fun.
And our big thanks to everyone at home for tuning in once more. Here comes the usual reminder to sign up to back us on ko-fi.com/quietriotpod if you can, and to leave us reviews, comments, and follow us on social media if you can't.
We'll be back on Sunday with special guest Arthur Snell, but for now, we say adieu and hope you have a wonderful, wonderful end to your week.
We love you lots. Goodbye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith, Andreou, and produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta, artwork by Simona Canelu, and edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global.
Quiet Riot.
It's a coping mechanism, though.
I might make you today's Wokey Dokey.
Go on. You do that. See what reaction you get. Knock yourself out.